Hello, so today I'm going to talk about the Amber Spyglass, the third book in Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials series. I do have reviews of the first two online, so by all means check those out and then come back here if you want to, or just watch them afterwards. And before we get into the book in any great detail, I just want to say that I love the Armoured Bears before Internet Weirdos made it creepy. Why do they always do that? So, The Amber Spyglass was published in 2000, which means I am, as usual, fashionably late to the party. And as you can see, I have dressed appropriately. Normally I would go into the plot, but the plot here is kind of strange. This is the third act of what was at the time a trilogy, and it's really just concerned with trying to, for the most part anyway, tie loose ends together. So, and build towards the battle that takes up a significant part of the book towards the end. So I'm not really going to do that, but at the same time, as usual, you should not consider these spoiler-free reviews if you haven't read the book or you're thinking of reading the book. So when I reviewed The Subtle Knife, I did mention that occasionally, unlike the first one, which was absolutely fantastic, the second one just felt a little bit like it lagged when Lyra wasn't around. And obviously this book continues on from the second book, so Lyra is held unconscious by Mrs. Coulter. And I think that Pullman was probably aware that his book did lag a little bit, because he sort of mixes in those little bits with Lyra dreaming of the undead world and Roger, the boy that was killed at the end of the first book by Asriel, and we will come back to this in a bit. So it does, it keeps Lyra enough in the front of our mind, even though she's absent from the proceedings of the book. And of course Will is there. As I mentioned in the Subtle Knife review, he's good too, so when Lyra's not around, Will is, for the most part. So still, it's moving along okay. But at the same time, that's sort of intermingled with a great deal of exposition in one section, which goes on for about 6 or 7 pages, that is just basically a recounting of the previous two books under the guise of some sort of interrogation or inquisition into what had happened before. And then we get the most egregious example of that at page 156, which begins, "As darkness falls, this is how things stood," and Pullman goes through all his primary characters, tells us where they all are. So yeah, there's quite a lot of exposition, which seems like a strange thing to have in what is the third act of your story. But what you should expect in the final act is very much a ramping up. So this weight of exposition feels like it's very much a ramping down. Likewise, we see Mary, the doctor, the scientist. She goes through the gates, the windows, whatever you want to call them, that Will and others have opened, and ends up in an entirely new world, one we haven't seen at all. And what we get here is some really intricately thought out world building. It's really quite interesting, and it's very good. It's very original, although perhaps that the Wheelers are stolen from Return to Oz, and I couldn't help thinking of that because obviously there's these paths that they're not golden. Anyway, it's quite interesting, and it's all new stuff, but you think, is the finale of your story, the third act, the place to be introducing this much new stuff? You have a look at The Subtle Knife. Look, and by the way, just how beautiful is that cover? Wonderful. If you have a look at The Subtle Knife, and you have a look at, I've done this in so many videos, haven't I? Like shown, it's about half this thick. And part of that is, this is the 20th anniversary edition of The Subtle Knife. Actually would be even slimmer, but it has appendixes and things that aren't in the other version of the second book. And actually has excerpts from the third book as well. So some of this book should have been in that book. There are a couple of points early on as well. It's like when Will's planning on rescuing Lyra, that you think actually that would have made as good an ending of The Subtle Knife as the ending to The Subtle Knife. Yeah, it's good stuff, but you can't help but think, is the structure right here? Perhaps it's not. And not only that, is there's some odd bits in the book starting to creep in, and we're going to deal with these as we go through, but one of the ones that struck me was Mary is a doctor. She's a scientist. She meets this group of people, these people that run on the wheels, and when she's trying to communicate with them, things are going reasonably, so it's reasonable to assume that they're not hostile. And they didn't attack her straight away or anything like that, so it's reasonable to assume. She says something and it makes them laugh, and she takes from that, well, if you can laugh, I don't suppose you're going to eat me. And what an absolutely strange and clearly unscientific hypothesis that is from a scientist. The whole purpose of commensality, like groups eating together, is that social aspect. How many meals have you had? And obviously this doesn't apply to vegans, vegetarians, where you've been eating animal flesh with your family or your friends and laughed. Maybe somebody's made a joke or something like that. That is a very unscientific thought to have, and based on absolutely nothing that you would consider to be a valid thought process from a scientist or any other intelligent being at all, really. But this part of the book actually has like a really nice positive message. When she meets them and gets to know them and starts communicating with them, there's this passage about how they have become us, and it's all through understanding that this can come about. And obviously this is like, you can apply this to all sorts of racial tensions in the entire world. It's like a really nice positive message. But then again, with all this good stuff, we also have some really strange stuff, and this is down purely in writing and editing, is that Mary makes a friend, Atal, and we know that she makes a friend because we're told on page 136 Atal, her friend, called, and we're told on page 137 her friend Atal was waiting, and then we're told on page 233 the Zalef, who was her particular friend, Atal by name, and it gets a little bit awkward. All three of those introductions, I think, are not great. Do you need that so much, or is it just trying to ram that point home a little unsubtly? The good stuff not quite working within the context of the story is actually something that happens a fair bit. For example, Mrs. Coulter, who's such a great villain in the first two books, in this one kind of switches sides, and it's not completely convincing. Though her death, again, if you look at, I think it's page 430, is really well written, and I might come back and just look at that text at the end, just so you can see just how good it is. But early in the book, we're given this, and we know that kind of like the demons are these people's souls. They're a reflection of what's inside them, sort of externally. At the start, they're living in a cave, and she pulls a bat down and gives it to her demon, who takes great delight in ripping it limb from limb. And it's like, okay, I mean, this is clearly not a nice person. And she suddenly seems to be getting sort of maternal, and she cuts a lock of Lyra's hair. There's no real reason for her to do that if she doesn't believe she's going to be losing Lyra, if she thinks she's going to be able to keep her unconscious as she is at that time. But of course, we need that hair to fall into the wrong hands for a plot point, which I'll get to in a bit. And it's just, okay, so that's the key to your switch. I'm not completely convinced by it. And also, she, in the second book, she had a power over the spectres, didn't she? I correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. I'm sure that she used the spectres in some way to attack somebody, and then she was the one that told them that they could fly so that they could attack the witches. Clearly she has some sort of power or influence over them, yet that is not addressed or used at all in this book, which makes you wonder why not when the spectres are so dangerous on the battlefield towards the end. Likewise, we have people from all sorts of planets and, angels and things flocking to fight for Lord Asriel, but there isn't anything to suggest that Lord Asriel is a good guy. Not to me anyway. I mean, we go back to the first book when he sort of abandons Lyra, and she's sort of really desperate for his approval in the early going, but he's like, no, not interested. And in this one, he says some quite sort of almost hateful things about her, sort of in the first half at any rate. But, his whole thing seems to be, I'm going to bring down this power, initially in the first book you think it's actually a quest for knowledge, but then towards the end it's like, oh, okay, it seems more like a quest for power. And it's like, okay, so you're going to bring down this power, you desire power for yourself. I mean, he's the leader of this army after all. And it seems to me that I would be very wary of him, that I would be like, this seems like the real potential, if you see God as a tyrant, that you're going to replace one tyrant with another. A lot of that is based on the fact that you can't get away from the fact that Lord Asriel is a child murderer. He killed Roger, calculated and in cold blood. You know, we've just had an election here in the UK. If you voted for somebody there, would you have done that if you knew that they had murdered a child? Would you have thought that they would be a suitable candidate for your political party? Would you have been able to stand behind them and say, I support you 100%? Because there's no way that I could. No way. So yeah, it's just like, I don't see how people are flocking to his banner. People are sending the knife and will, saying you must go to Asriel, he needs you. And it's just like, forgetting just how evil Asriel has behaved. The last point on Lord Asriel is that towards the end, he's just talking with Mrs. Coulter, and they have this great reconciliation. She says to him, I thought that you were trying to destroy Dust, but really you were trying to save Dust. And he says, yeah, I lied because I thought it was what you wanted to hear. Which to me, I'm sorry again, it just feels like Pullman has changed his mind at some point in the development of this story, and now he's got to explain away a plot hole. Which brings us to Lyra's great betrayal, which was prophesied in Book 1, and is revealed here to be that she leaves Pantalaimon when she enters the world of the dead. She feels that she has to do that to see Roger, and she can't take him. It's as simple as that. She just cannot. It's not really a betrayal, it's just what she has to do what she thinks is the right thing. So it's completely in keeping with her character to make that tough choice. She certainly doesn't say to Pantalaimon, I'm not going to do this, and then do it. That would be a great betrayal, to lie to Pantalaimon. Of course, being her own soul, you think perhaps that lie would be impossible anyway. But again, you know, the way Pullman writes this, it's really powerful. It's for a young adult book particularly, this kind of heart-rending stuff to see them separated and sort of wailing out for each other as they are. Really good writing, but at the same time you're like, it's not a betrayal. You're kind of like, you prophesized this betrayal, so you've got to have one, but this is not it. So there's some real powerful imagery when Lyra sort of describes herself as feeling like she has lace skin and that the wind is ripping through it into her ribs and stuff. It's like, yeah, this is good writing. I like this. Powerful imagery, particularly in the whole Land of the Dead section. But again, it's almost in service of something that isn't completely convincing. And on their escape from the Land of the Dead, we get to the next one, which is where that lock of hair that I mentioned comes in, and that falls into the hands of the Magisterium, who use it to create a dimensional bomb that they set off where they are, but it will explode where the other end of that hair is. As they're sort of escaping from the Land of the Dead, Will's father and Lee Scoresby, they're both their ghosts, come and say, you have to do this. You have to cut the rest of her hair at that point and throw it through a door into another world where the bomb will go off. We're told that the Land of the Dead is almost like a purgatory, and that the gates of heaven have been closed to all species on all worlds, and everybody's gone to this Land of the Dead. So it's an enormous place. Obviously would be absolutely packed with people. It would be really difficult for Lee Scoresby and Will's father to get right there at that time, and that plan was created after they died, so they would have been in the Land of the Dead. So how would they have known about the plan? How would they have known that the plan was being enacted? How would they know what it was going to do? How would they know how to foil it? You know, I think again we're being asked to just go and overlook it. While all of this is going on and it all comes to a natural head, and you think, okay, so the book is done. But the book is 540 pages long. I think that's quite a lot to still have left to do. The story feels like it's done. But what you actually get is Mary explaining the workings of the world, of the Malefa and things like that, and how the windows are what's caused the spectres, and that all the windows have to be closed, and what had been hinted at earlier, that you can't live on a world that's not your own. Now, firstly, again, in the modern era, that seems almost like an anti-immigration comment. I'm like, it seemed like a fairly progressive book when we were dealing with the Malefa, but this idea that you sort of have to stay where you're born, I can see a few people might take issue with that, but it was a minor thing. So I kind of like, okay, perhaps that wasn't the intent, because the intent seems to be simply to deny us a happy ending. Now, I know that a lot of people go, oh, you don't get a happy ending. Well, that's great. I like things to be a little bit darker or a little bit realer. So I'm not saying not having a happy ending is bad. What I'm saying is that here, it seems to be done largely for an arbitrary reason. You want to deny the happy ending, but you don't have to. You could quite easily just not include that little bit and it would be okay. Because believe it or not, as I get older, I think I'm getting less cynical, not more. And I know that will come as a surprise to people that watch more than this video on this channel. But when I see people going through so much, especially young people, and that they've worked hard and that they've sort of struggled, I kind of want them to get a suitable reward for their effort. And I know that the world doesn't always work that way, but I think that it would be wonderful if it did. And sort of in fiction particularly, that would be really nice. Plus, because of that arbitrary nature, and this being a book for children, you think, is this a message you want to tell children, that your work and your struggle, you won't always get what you deserve at the end of it? It's like, I don't know. I think for children, I'd be happier with a more cheerful message that, work hard, struggle by all means, you get what you deserve in the end. But this idea of getting what you deserve in the end, is that not a Christian thing? Do good things in our life and we'll all go to heaven. Do bad things in our life, you'll go to hell. And this book has an overtly anti-Christian message. Now, I know that this is not going to bother a lot of people, so I'm going to put a timer on the screen so you can skip the bits where I deal with the anti-Christian message. But while that's up, I just want to point out that I am wearing, quite deliberately, a Marilyn Manson t-shirt. Okay, this is to point out to you that I am perfectly capable of dealing and enjoying things with an anti-Christian message, and that is because I don't really consider myself a Christian. I don't consider myself to be an atheist necessarily, but certainly more agnostic, I think. So an anti-Christian message shouldn't really bother me a great deal. All over the book, the message is that what we do on earth is more powerful and more important than what we would do in heaven. And because of my own personal views, I think that's a fine message, one I'm completely happy to support. But if I was a Christian, the depiction of God as a sort of withered and senile creature, I think that I might well take offence at. And throughout the book we're shown religious men particularly as being predatory towards children. Mrs. Coulter says it about the magisterium. She's furious at the idea that they would think she would turn her daughter over to them, and naturally that's sort of just a protective mother anyway, you might well think that. But Will encounters a priest who's a corpulent, vile, drunk and a bigot, and it's so cliched that it's almost disappointing from somebody like Pullman, and it becomes almost damaging to the plot, because we have these two angels, Balthamos and Barak. I think I'm probably pronouncing them wrong. They side with Azrael. Again, I've already mentioned that I wonder really why so many people do side with him. But Barak gives himself up as a heroic self-sacrifice to protect the others. And it's really quite well done. It's a touching moment, particularly Balthamus's reaction to it, because these two are in a relationship with each other. So it's like, it's powerful stuff. And Balthamus, when there's fighting, he's not a fighter. He's almost cowardly. And then at one point he does run away from the fighting. And Will's quite understanding about it, saying, he's not a warrior. But this sort of cowardliness of him is then redeemed towards the end. And I won't try to spoil it too much, but it's a really good character arc for a character that is very much on the periphery of the story for the most part. And I really quite liked him, and particularly the way in one of the parts where he's pretending to be a demon because Will doesn't have one, which makes him stand out. And he says, "Oh, would you mind being a bird?" And Balthama says, "Oh, how tedious." And it's really C-3PO-esque, isn't it? It's just a wonderful line. And I really did warm to him as a character, and his redemption was pleasing. And again, this anti-Christian message is betrayed by the sort of the zealot Gomez, Father Gomez, who's picked to be the one who would murder either Mary or Lyra, or whoever he happens to encounter. And it's really well set up. He's building up points by being particularly pious for a future absolution. He weeps with pride when he's selected to murder a child, to commit murder in the church's name. He's a source of incredible pride to him, to be so religious that you commit sin in religion's name. This paradox is a fascinating thing to explore in a character, but Gomez is too minor a character to properly investigate the concept satisfactorily. And it's almost done well in that Gomez is so zealous that you really feel that, but then it doesn't really transpire to be this great sort of hunting, of one person hunting down another with this intent to murder. It's like the setup is there, but the execution just isn't. And it's an odd thing to have missed out on, or to have not developed, when you are selling this book as anti-Christian. But like I say, it's damaging to the plot, particularly when we get to the land of the dead. I mean, it feels like purgatory. All the dead from all the worlds have been going to this place and not heaven. But of course, that would also make it so vast that the sudden arrival and saving of Lyra by Will's father and by Lee Scoresby becomes very much a Deus Ex Machina moment, and it's not great. But even here in purgatory, we find a holy man, a vile holy man, clinging desperately to his faith, trying to drag everybody else down with him. And it's just, how many of these vile holy people are you going to show before you think you've got enough of it in your story? And then when Mary's relating at length in that last 100 pages sort of the loss of her faith, it isn't one of those bits where the loss of your faith is important to you as a character. It's one of those bits where you say that nobody should have faith. But this is very much starting to feel like, at this point, if you believe, you're an idiot. And it's directed purely at Christians. And that's explicit. I mean, Mary says, the Christian religion is a very powerful and convincing mistake, that's all. If I was Christian, that would make me angry. Just saying. It's so different to saying, I've lost my faith. It's just outright hostility, really. To single out one religion for criticism, to ignore the good work that people of that faith do, it's unfair. It's presenting just one side of an issue, and I certainly don't intend to downplay the bad things that have been done or anyone's personal experiences by saying that. And like I say, I don't consider myself a Christian. I do accept that most people won't feel very strongly about that because they'll be caught up in the story, which absolutely races along between the first 100 pages and the last 100 pages, which are heavy with exposition. It seems like an incredibly negative review to this point, doesn't it? But that's because there's been so much that was so good in the first book particularly, and the second book was very worthy as well. And there's so much good stuff in here, but it's almost not coming together really how it should have done, or as well as it should have done, rather. And I can't help but thinking that, this was the end of the trilogy at the time. There's more books now, but I think that without knowing that there was more books, I would have thought this was a very disappointing end to that trilogy. And like I say, the heavy exposition at the beginning and the end feels like a weight that brings down the rest of it. And even though that middle part sort of is here, it's there, it's everywhere, it's like we're introduced to all the old characters coming back but for little bits and not doing that much sometimes, and you think it's a shame at times that it doesn't quite pull it all together for me. I did like it. I liked Pullman's writing style for the most part, but there's so many little bits that I didn't enjoy, which is a shame, because if you've seen my review of the first one, you know just how much I loved that first book. This one isn't quite as good. It feels like so much has been jammed in that one, it is jammed in and it starts spilling over the sides almost. That those bits are the bits that don't quite work, and the bits that do fit in, they work. When Lyra's around again, just like in the second one, she's such a great character that it's always more enjoyable when she's around than when she's not. Will is solid as well. They work better together, so those parts when they're apart, not quite great. The denial of the happy ending for, like I say, I think it's fairly arbitrary. We could have done without that. Perhaps he always had sequels in mind, but this was marketed as a trilogy. But if you had sequels in mind, then the ending is okay. But if you think that he didn't, then I find it disappointing. And I have to say, sufficiently disappointing that in all likelihood I am not going to read any further into the series anyway. So for me, that is the ending that I get. And I've probably put the seagull with his thumbs up, because if you've loved the first two books, you want to see how this one develops anyway. And for the most part, Philip Pullman's writing is good. For the most part, the situations and the characters are good, just don't always tie up well with the other two books. And the beginning and the end are a little slow. But other than that, it's just solid enough. Just.